أهلا بكم من جديد إلى مستقبل الطاقة. نعود لنستكمل المقابلة التي أجريناها مع رئيس قسم أبحاث النفط لدى جولدمان ساكس دان سترويفن، حيث تناولنا في هذا الجزء من المقابلة عدة مواضيع أبرزها التوقعات لنمو إنتاج النفط الأمريكي في ضوء اقترابه لربما من تسجيل مستوى قياسي جديد عند 13 مليون برميل يوميا مع نهاية العام. كما استعرضنا توقعات جولدمان ساكس لأسعار النفط نهاية السنة الحالية ولمنتصف العام المقبل. لكننا بداية ناقشنا واردات الهند المتنامية منذ بداية العام من النفط الخام الروسي، الأمر الذي زاد حصة روسيا السوقية على حساب كبار المنتجين الآخرين. فهل هذا الأمر مستدام؟ وهل على المصدرين الآخرين مثل السعودية أو العراق أن يقلقوا من هذا الأمر؟ لنتابع.
What has happened this year is that you have seen a very large drop-off in exports out of Russia to Europe, and these barrels have been rerouted primarily to India, second to China, and to a lesser extent places such as Turkey or Latin America. This is a result of the price caps and the EU sanctions on Russian barrels. I understand where the worry is coming from a Middle Eastern perspective, because the Asian market, especially the Indian market, we think is a high growth market. We think that in a normal year, Indian oil demand is growing by about 200, perhaps even 300,000 barrels per day. So in a sense, India is sort of the new China from an oil demand and a GDP growth perspective. That said, I wouldn't be overly concerned from the perspective of producers in the Middle East, both because number one, if Europe stops buying barrels from Russia, opportunities open up in Europe. Second, from a long-run perspective, I think Middle Eastern producers are well positioned with low break-even production costs, very significant investments in carbon capture and storage and decarbonization technologies more broadly, and a very strategic location. And finally, countries such as Saudi Arabia are also investing in refineries in Asia, including China, and so are getting closer to the customer.
دعنا نتحدث عن الإنتاج الأمريكي شيل أويل. هذا الإنتاج قد ينمو بوتيرة هزيلة هذا العام بنحو 200 ألف برميل يوميا بحسب توقعاتكم. صحيح أن عدد منصات الحفر النفطية العاملة في أمريكا آخذ بالتراجع، ولكن يرى بعض المراقبين بأن نشاط الحفر في حوض البيرميان الصخري ما زال مرتفعا، وأن الشركات تركز نشاط حفرها على الآبار ذات الإنتاجية الأعلى، هذا بالتزامن مع انخفاض التكاليف. هناك توقعات بأن الإنتاج الأمريكي قد يسجل مستوى قياسي جديد هذا العام عند 13 مليون برميل يوميا. بالتالي ما هي ملاحظاتك على هذه القراءات؟
So I think your characterization is correct. While the rig count is down by just over 15% since late last year, production, U.S. crude production, has sort of been moving sideways for several months in a row, because we're basically producing more oil per well and per rig. And if you look beneath the surface, what's really happening is that the rig count is concentrated among private, smaller producers who produce less barrels for a given rig, whereas the larger, typically public companies, have kept their rig count flat and typically guide towards some modest additional growth over the next year. Big picture, we only have modest growth for U.S. supply in our forecast, despite the fact that we forecast prices above the forwards with Brent at 93, 12 months ahead. And there's really two key structural reasons. Number one, we are convinced that U.S. producers are committed to capital discipline and want to make sure that they return enough cash to shareholders and don't build up excess capacity as they have done in prior boom-bust cycles. And second, at the margin, the geology of U.S. production is becoming somewhat less favorable every year, including in the Permian, which has really been the main engine of global supply growth over the past decade.
بعد أن سجل سعر برنت أفضل أداء شهري له منذ أكثر من عام ونيف، مسجلا ارتفاعات ل7 أسابيع متتالية حتى الآن، هل السعر عند 86 دولارا منطقيا في رأيك، أخذا بعين الاعتبار المعطيات التي لديك؟ وما هي توقعاتك لسعر برنت خلال الأرباع القليلة المقبلة؟
Base case, you're flat for the rest of the year. Our December 2023 price forecast for Brent is 86. We're now at 86. We had been looking for the rally we have seen over the last 6-7 weeks for a long time, because it was our view that you would see large summer deficits, which would create upward pressure on time spreads and therefore crude prices. At this point, our fundamental analysis suggests that oil prices are now basically in line with their fair value for the near term. That said, we think that the forwards for 2024 are too low. So we think that in a year you will be in the low 90s. We have Brent at 93, whereas the forwards are in the low 80s. We continue to see some upward pressure in prices in early 2024 because we have some deficits not only in the second half of this year but also in 2024.
في سؤال أخير ومنفصل، مع استمرار جهود خفض الانبعاثات عالميا وإلقائها حالة من عدم اليقين على التوقعات طويلة الأجل للعرض والطلب على النفط، ماذا يعني هذا بالنسبة للاستثمارات في المشاريع النفطية؟ وكيف سيؤثر ذلك على أسعار النفط على المدى الطويل؟
It's correct that the direct effect of decarbonization on oil demand and therefore oil prices is negative. That said, I don't think it's obvious that decarbonization will necessarily lead to lower oil prices. Really, two key reasons. Number one, in the absence of investment, global oil supply will drop every year by 5 to 6% because of the so-called geological decline rates. Second, I believe that because the uncertainty about long-run oil demand is so elevated that over time, investors will require a higher risk premium to compensate for the risk associated with the uncertainty about oil demand and the possibility to have so-called stranded assets. If investors require a higher risk premium, that means that all other things equal, to convince investors to put their money in oil projects, long-dated oil prices, the back end of the curve, will have to rise higher to compensate investors. So in short, it's not clear that decarbonization means lower oil prices.
بهذا مشاهدينا نأتي إلى ختام هذه الحلقة من مستقبل الطاقة. للمزيد تابعونا على منصة X تحت وسم #مستقبل الطاقة. يمكنكم أيضا الاستماع إلى حلقاتنا على العربية بودكاست ومشاهدة حلقات البرنامج كاملة على موقعنا الإلكتروني العربية.net/programs. نلتقي الأسبوع المقبل في نفس الموعد. إلى اللقاء.